You're listening to the Sixers Beat with your host, Derek Bodner, right here on LibertyBallers.com and LibertyBroadcast.co.
Welcome, everybody. This is Derek Bodner here with Max Rappaport on the latest Sixers Beat podcast. Before we begin, as always, you can subscribe to the podcast. I don't know why we say this, because if you're listening to this podcast, you've probably already subscribed and you probably know how to use a podcast app.
Maybe you're listening in someone's car, like they're driving and playing from their phone, and you're listening and you're thinking like, man, this is a great podcast. How can I subscribe to this?
You never know. But if you are asking that question, you can subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, the TuneIn Radio app. Also check out the CLNS Radio app, where you can find ourselves, Sam Vecini's Game Theory Podcast, Real GM Radio, B-Ball Breakdown, and a whole slew of others. As always, if you can, please leave us a rating or review on iTunes. We are vain. We want to get as many as we can. We also want to move up in those rankings, so please do that. Help us out. We appreciate it. All right, there's been a few things come up since we did our last podcast, where, I guess starting off with the most important, how about that Game of Zones episode, huh? Are you a Game of Thrones fan?
You know what? It's funny. I'm not a Game of Thrones fan. I've watched the first season and that's it. I feel like I just fell too far behind. Everyone else had already, this was like last year. I was like, you know what? I'm going to try to watch this. And I was just so far behind that I couldn't talk about it with anyone, because they knew what was going to happen 5 seasons beyond. So it just wasn't that interesting for me. And I don't know why I haven't watched Game of Zones, because I watched, obviously, the Sixers one, the Embiid one that just came out, and it was awesome and so well done. And I went back and I watched a couple more, and I was like, why wasn't I watching this? This is basically made for me. This is made for people like me, and I don't watch this for some reason.
Well, I mean, it's also in part made for people who watch Game of Thrones as well. So you have seen the Sixers, The Process episode.
Yes.
What was your favorite reference in that?
I thought this was underrated at the very end when during the rolling credits. I don't know if they found someone from Philadelphia to do this accent, or just someone who did
from Philadelphia.
The creators are. I don't know, but maybe those guys speak with that kind of accent. I feel like that was a perfect representation of the Philadelphia accent in the take a picture and water ice and all that. I thought it was well done. I thought maybe my favorite Easter egg was the Hinkie flow chart that they scrolled by Jim Adair's Hinkie flow chart with Choo Choo on it and Shank Akyol and all that, and all of Hinkie's moves laid out.
And then at the bottom, the picks will swap. Bottom left.
Picks will swap.
I loved Aguilar can't even catch at the end in the credits, because it had nothing to do with the Sixers, and was just you have to be from Philadelphia to really get that one. I liked Ben Simmons in on crutches as they celebrate. I mean, I don't like it, but it was a good reference. And just the raising the cat thing, the fact that it still has life.
Meek Mill raising the cat.
I feel very good for Dennis about that.
Yeah.
And Milk of the Popovich too. That was funny. Very well done.
Temple of Shirley.
Yeah, you could tell these guys were from Philadelphia. It felt like they put a little more into this one than they typically do. All right, moving on to actual basketball topics. We have a whole bunch. We have Ball saying that, or a report that Ball may consider working out for the Sixers. We have the report that the Sixers are high on Dennis Smith Jr. and De'Aaron Fox, and that they're in play at 3. There was obviously the talk with from Bill Simmons about potentially moving up to 1, and the report out there that the Sixers were considering pursuing Otto Porter in free agency. So, where would you like to begin, Max?
Let's talk about Lonzo Ball.
All right,
I think that's a good place to start, because that'll kind of where we're feeling about where the Lakers are with Ball and how we feel about if Ball falls to 3. I feel like kind of sets up our talk about the big board a little bit more.
Well, I still think the Lakers end up going Ball at 3 or at 2. I think they're going to do their due diligence, but I think he is still the front runner for that spot. But if he falls to 3, then this is I love the Lonzo Ball debate, because there are some very real questions about Lonzo Ball, from his on-ball defense to creating in the half court to his pick and roll play to whether that shot translates off the dribble. And then there's some concerns that I think are, you just kind of assume because he's a point guard who's known for his passing that he can't work with Simmons. And I don't see that. And then you get in the whole father debate, which clouds everything. Look, right now, I have a real struggle trying to find a guy who has both upside and fit. Like that. And look, fit, there has never been a time where the Sixers have drafted in any part of this rebuild where fit has mattered more. None of these guys, with the exception of possibly Fultz if you were number one, and luckily he fits anyway. Unluckily, you're not going to be in a position to draft him. But none of these guys project to be more important players, bigger impact players than Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. So ignoring their fit is almost impossible to do. Like a guy like, even if a guy like Josh Jackson has, primary creator potential, and I don't think he does. I think that's been overstated a little bit. But even if he would, if he doesn't fit with Ben Simmons, or if he doesn't create better than Ben Simmons, I'm not going to say it doesn't matter, but you can't ignore his weaknesses as well. And I think one of the guys that has a lot of upside and also fits is Lonzo Ball. If he fell, I would absolutely have interest.
Yeah, I think if he falls to 3, I feel really torn about 2 through 8, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a little bit. I feel like there's not a lot of separation after Fultz and before you hit like Lauri Markkanen and like maybe Collins from Gonzaga. Like I feel like that's all that range is like basically day by day I kind of switch how I feel about it. But I think Jackson and Ball for me are just a shade above, with Ball being a little bit ahead of Jackson just because of the fit and everything with the Sixers. I think if he fell, I'd lean pretty heavily towards Lonzo Ball. I think you're right. I think the Lakers are going to go with Lonzo Ball. I will say the fact that he's considering working out for the Sixers makes me think that his camp thinks there's a possibility that won't happen, because you feel like it feels as locked in almost, or felt up until a couple days ago, that the Lakers were as locked in on Ball as the Celtics are on Fultz. Sure. So for me, if I'm Lonzo Ball and I'm 95% sure I'm going to the Lakers, I'm not working out for anyone because I don't want to get hurt. And if the workout goes really poorly and whatever, like,
it gives off the appearance that you are sliding.
Yeah,
I mean, people generally just refuse to work out for people or for teams far lower in the draft than they expect to go. And for these guys at the top, that could be 1 or 2 spots.
Well, especially for him, because it's like, okay, so if he doesn't go 2, like, even if he doesn't work out for the Sixers, you'd feel pretty confident the Sixers will probably take you. And even if they don't, that like someone might trade up to get you, or like, unless he really would prefer to go to the Sixers and not fall beyond 3, or not have another team trade into that spot and take him, which I don't really see why that would be the case, even though I think he fits fairly well with the Sixers. Like, it's not a glamorous franchise to play for necessarily for Lonzo Ball. Like, I don't really get what he stands to gain from working out for the Sixers. So it leads me to believe that maybe there's a little bit more of a thought that he could fall, that maybe De'Aaron Fox or Jason Tatum or one of these other players is on the Lakers' radar. I still think they're going to draft Ball, but it's interesting that he decided to do that.
No, I agree with you. I don't think that was just a willy-nilly random decision to at least consider that. I think there has to be something behind it. We'll see. I mean, there's still, we have almost a month to go. There's still, 4 weeks to go. Whether or not anything happens with those top 2. I mean, right now, so much it feels like people talk about the draft starts with Philadelphia. But there is still, while I feel like the top 2 prospects are pretty well defined, there is still a chance of a trade. There is still a chance that the Lakers do something not unexpected, but if I guess a little bit unexpected. There is still a chance the Lakers go in another direction. Last year at this time, everybody knew Simmons was going number 1, and everybody knew Ingram was going 2. This does feel a little more up in the air this year.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more up in the air. Everything after the first pick, it's really unclear. And I think maybe we can talk a little bit more now about where we stand at the moment. But I think just for me, as I've started to delve more, now knowing the Sixers are picking 3, like delving more into the prospects that are in that range, it's really hard. I feel like I go back and forth like every day on who I want in those positions. I mean, I think it's like the same 5 or 6 guys that doesn't really change, but it's like whoever's Frankie Vision video I just watched is like jumps to the top of my board. Because like whether that's Dennis Smith or it's Josh Jackson or it's Jonathan Isaac, like I kind of feel like I could convince myself that any of those guys is the second best player in this draft or third best player in this draft.
I mean, last year I struggled in this 3 through 8 range because there was nobody that really jumped out at me. Everybody that I saw overwhelming concern. And not that one or two of them won't overcome that, but I had pretty real concern about most players in that range. This year is kind of the opposite. Anybody they could take in that 3 through 8 range, I would have some level of optimism. And certainly you still have major concerns about them. If you didn't, they would go higher. But you could at least talk yourself into it. And like you, it has been difficult for me to really nail down. I struggled to put out a real, and I get asked this every day, but I struggled to put out a real big board because I don't want it to present it that it's as set in stone as putting a list out there really does. And it's a lot more fluid than it is in most years. It's going to be, I mean, it's like I said, if there's just one prospect where I could say this guy has both the upside and the fit, and because I am taking fit so much more into consideration, it has made this a little bit more of a minefield to navigate through. But everybody I look at, I do have at least some level of optimism.
Yeah, and I think what it is that after Fultz, who I really think, as I watch more Fultz, it's like so clear that he's the best player in this draft. Once you get after him, it's like there are 5 or 6 or 7 guys who have superstar potential, but like one massive or 2 massive flaws. Right. And that includes Lonzo Ball, that includes Josh Jackson, Dennis Smith, Jonathan Isaac. Like all of them have 1 or 2 areas of their game you point to and go like, I don't know. But then you watch their clips and it's like they are elite in one area. Like De'Aaron Fox is an elite transition player and he's so fast and really physically gifted and a good passer. Lonzo Ball obviously has the passing and the range and is decently athletic, but then there's, the wonkiness of his game and on-ball defense and all that. Like, I don't know. It's there's a lot of guys you point to and you go like, well, if you could just fix this one thing, and it's, I guess, comes down to whose one thing is the most fixable.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of it also comes down to the player fixing the one thing, and that is the area of this whole thing that we have the least amount of information on. It's last year, Brian Colangelo kind of had, he had a layup. He had a decision that wasn't really a decision that was kind of made for him with Ben Simmons. This year, he's going to earn his pay a lot more because all of these guys do have talent that makes them legitimate potential picks. But one of these guys, first of all, you have to figure out which weaknesses you're more willing to live without. But you also have to figure out which one is going to be kind of the outlier in terms of improvement. And that is always the hardest part of this process. Any scout worth his real weight could tell you this is what a guy does well. This is what it gets a little harder when you say this is what he's going to do well at the NBA level, but a lot of people can do that successfully. But figuring out who's going to improve more than the norm, that is a real difficult spot. That is what we as a media have the least amount of information on. And that really is where the biggest mistakes are made. But yeah, everybody here, like you said, from Ball to Jackson, to Tatum and Isaac and Dennis Smith and Malik Monk, they all have very pronounced strengths and weaknesses. They all have at least something they could add to the team. It's it's such a unique situation where the Sixers are because they do have Simmons, they do have Embiid, and you do have to complement those. Like I said, whoever you take, there's a very low chance that they're going to end up being a better prospect, a better focal point of your team than those 2 guys. So whether or not you can play with them is going to be a big deal.
Do you think then it's worth thinking about this decision, if you're viewing it that way, as if these players don't pan out, if they end up just being role players or they never figure out that one part of their game or the aspects of their game that are troubling right now, who fits best? Like, do you think at that point maybe you make the decision based on like, okay, well, I'm pretty sure even if Malik Monk doesn't work out, he's going to be an awesome fit for our roster and plays a role as a shooter. Or, Jonathan Isaac, he's a versatile defender and he can stretch the floor a little bit. Like versus, someone like Fox, who if he doesn't figure out his jumper, I just don't know how he fits at all in this roster.
Well, even somebody like Jackson. And I think that's probably where a lot of disagreement comes in, because I think that the chance of Jackson just not being a fit for this team is higher than I think a lot of people view it. And I think a lot of people view him as a safe prospect because he does so many things well. And I think there's some truth to that. He does do a lot of things well. I'm not going to say otherwise. But a lot of what he does well outside of, defensively he's going to be a contributor almost regardless, or at least I don't see a likely path where he isn't. But offensively, his shot creation is going to be dependent on his ability to shoot from the perimeter and their need to go up, fight through screens, their need to really respect that shot. If they don't have to respect that, it's going to be harder for him to create at a high level. His ability to drive and get in the paint, again, another legitimate skill that he has. But if they can play so far off of him, and if they can go under pick and rolls, then he's not going to be able to really maximize that strength. So I do think there's some, I think Jackson's kind of really the quintessential. He could develop his shot and end up being the perfect third option, or you could really struggle to fit him alongside Embiid and Simmons, and that could be a real tough match. So I think he's a perfect example of that. I think Fox is the other obvious example as well. I mean, this is a guy who shot like 25% off of catch and shoot shots, and I released a graphic of this where you have effective field goal percentage on one axis and you have attempts on the other axis. He was kind of in the bottom left corner where his effective field goal percentage was like sub 30%, and he took only so many, maybe like 40 catch and shoot attempts. That's not the greatest fit with the Sixers. That's and a lot of these guys, like Fultz, I think 80% of Fultz's catch and shoot attempts were contested. Fox was like half of that. They were giving him open looks. He couldn't convert. So yes, there's some reason to be optimistic with the form. There's some reason to be optimistic with his free throw, but translating that out to the NBA 3-point line, I think that's a real, very legitimate concern. And if that doesn't translate, then the rest of the game, what do you have? Yeah, he's a pesky defender on the perimeter. He can get in the paint, but again, if they don't have to respect that jump shot, how much can you really expect him to get at the paint at an elite level? He's going to be very, very. He's another one where, because of his fit with the team, I don't know how you don't take that into account.
Yeah, no, totally, and I think that's where with Josh Jackson going to the lottery, I was like, okay, I think this is a 3-player. Not to say that after 3 you can't find a player, but this is a draft where the top player is clearly the top guy. There are 2 guys after that are fairly close, and then there's a drop-off. And I don't feel like that right now, partially because the more I've watched Lonzo Ball and the more I've watched Josh Jackson, I see those flaws. And with Josh Jackson in particular, who has been my number 2 guy for a little while now, like I maybe fell into that camp where I saw him as being so well-rounded and having so many aspects of his game that could help you that he had a low floor or a high floor, but I don't really feel like that anymore. And for the reasons you just described.
And I mean, it's so much like if the Sixers were, there's 2 ways to look at it. First of all, it's what will Josh Jackson be if he doesn't improve his jump shot in a meaningful way? And then the other is, what are the odds that he improves his jump shot in a meaningful way? And you could say, because his upside is so high, if he does improve it, even if there's not necessarily a high chance that he does improve it and become a good shooter, you'll bet on that off chance because the upside is worth it. And maybe if the Sixers were 2 years prior in their rebuild, that would be a valid way of looking at it. But because, like I said, there's a relatively small chance that he ends up being a better player than Simmons and Embiid. And because that fit would be so bad if he doesn't, then it's the philosophy with the Sixers. I really do think he is where you kind of have to really look at where the rebuild is and investigate whether or not he makes sense for this team and for this spot. It's tough because passing on talent sucks, and it really makes me queasy doing so. But I'm very concerned about that jumper.
Yeah, same.
All right, what else do we have here? Bill Simmons, twice on his podcast, mentioned trading with the Sixers. The proposal he keeps throwing out is number 3 pick, the Lakers pick in 2018, and Dario Saric. I guess real quick, we don't want to spend too much time on it because it's kind of a made-up proposal. It does make sense that the Sixers would entertain moving up, but I don't know how much sense it makes sense. I don't know how much it makes sense for Boston to move down. But is that something where you would have interest in?
I'm really torn about this deal. I feel like the problem with giving up that Lakers pick is if that I think for me, sorry, I'm having trouble with this. I think for me it's a trade that neither team can make, because for the Sixers, that Lakers pick from a team that, unless something crazy happens, is going to be probably bottom 5, bottom 6 in record next year. That's a really good shot at a top 2 or 3 pick in a draft that is supposed to have 2 or 3 or 4, franchise type players between Doncic and Michael Porter Jr. and Mo Bamba. Like, I feel like, and we're so far out, we're a year out from that draft and things change. And a year ago, Harry Giles was the number 1 player in this draft. Like, things change, but I think giving up that shot at the number 1 or number 2 or 3 pick in what's supposed to be a really good draft, plus giving up the 3 pick, plus giving up one of your, a guy locked in on 3 more years of not making a lot of money who can contribute in Saric. It's a lot to give up for the Sixers, even though I love Fultz. And part of that is, it was like you said earlier about last year's draft versus this year's draft. Like, this year, it's tough to make the decision at 3 because you like so many guys. Whereas if it had been at 4, let's say last year, or even 3, even the 3 pick last year, like, you would have had trouble because you were trying to find that guy who you felt good about. Right now, it's like, there's so many guys I want that I don't want to pass up on any of them. So, I don't know. I feel like giving up that 3 pick, giving up the chance of the Lakers pick and Dario is just a little bit too much for me, even though I'd be really tempted. And for the for the Celtics, it's like, I don't know, they're in a position where if they're trading that number 1 pick, it should be for a player who can help them get over the hump. And if not, I don't see how packaging it down to get 3 things when they're a team that's like right on the edge. They were in the conference finals this year, and had the best record in the East. I just don't see why they do that. And if I'm them, I'm just taking Markelle Fultz. And if I don't take Markelle Fultz, I'm trading him for a player.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the only reason that Boston would even entertain it is if they have Josh Jackson rated higher than they have Markelle Fultz. And I don't think that to be the case. It, like you said, trading for more young pieces and taking an elite prospect and trading it for, a good prospect, Dario Saric, and another future pick. It just doesn't make sense with really either direction, whether that's, rebuilding and trying to build around an elite talent, which has avoided them so far in the rebuild, or whether that's trying to get that, that current player, that veteran, to try to push them over the top. It doesn't satisfy any of those avenues. So I would be surprised. Like I said, the only way I could really see that happening is if Boston does have, Josh Jackson rated higher than Fultz. That being said, it's an easy yes for me. And I thought about it a lot for a little bit, and I went back and forth, and then I really just sat down and I thought about it, and I said, look, what are the odds, even if the Lakers end up with the 4th worst record, what's the odds of that going to be a top 2 pick? Okay. You're looking at it, it's like maybe 25, 30%. What are the odds that the Lakers could be better than a 4th worst record? And it might not be that high, but it's there. It's there. And even if you end up getting a top 2 pick, what are the odds that is A, a better prospect than Markelle Fultz, and B, a better fit than Markelle Fultz? And the combination of all of those 3, when I added them together, it's just, Markelle Fultz is an elite prospect. He's probably going to be there with Doncic and Porter in terms of just his ability as a player. I think he's going to be certainly a better fit than Porter. Getting a guy with that kind of elite talent who fits almost perfectly with Embiid and Simmons, I can't pass that up. And I would give up an absurd amount to make that a reality. I do think he's clearly the best talent in this draft. I do think he's a very legitimate number 1 pick. And I'm kind of surprised that there wouldn't be a little more interest in doing that from the, kind of the temperature I gauge from Sixers fans, in which case it was about 67% no. I think a lot of people look at these 2 draft picks. First of all, I think a lot of people overrated Dario Saric in this equation. The fact that he was kind of the sticking point for a lot of people blows my mind, because when I look at it and I look at the things we're talking about, Saric, the number 3 pick, the Lakers pick next year, and Fultz, he is far and away the 4th most valuable of that list. But for a lot of people, he was the sticking point. And look, I get that he is a very, very exciting personality. You've watched him come over. You've gone through the fights of whether or not he even would. It would, it would be tough to lose him. It would be tough to watch him in Celtics green. I get all of that. But I think when you kind of remove emotion from that equation, in 4 years, if Markelle Fultz is a superstar and you turn down that trade because of Dario Saric, who you don't even know if he's going to be a starter, he might be a sixth man on your team. That to me is I couldn't believe how much that became a part of the argument. So I think when you look at the 2 picks that are in question here, what are the odds that both of those players, the 3 pick and the Lakers pick, turn into an all-star caliber player? And I think that's very, very low. I don't think we're really necessarily, I think we kind of kid ourselves on how much risk there is even in the 2 through 5 portion of the draft. So certainly getting 2 superstars to the level of what I expect Fultz to be is out of the question. Getting two all-stars where you could make a case, well, maybe you have a big 2 and then 2 all-stars is better than a big 3. And I'm not sure I necessarily even agree with that, but even that is really, really, it would be, you would be overshooting your draft slot considerably if you got 2 all-stars with these picks. And then if you look at it where you might not even get a, upside of it, might not even be a single player better than Fultz or a single player who fits better than Fultz. To me, it's just, this is an opportunity. If it actually existed, I would pounce on it with little hesitation. I just don't think it's going to be out there.
Yeah, I guess as you talk about it, I get more and more sold on it. And the idea of having Embiid, Simmons, and Fultz, you just have to feel so good about that. And in reality, it's not like you're really like mortgaging your future. You're giving up a pick you got for MCW that is in addition to a pick, your own pick that you own. You're giving up Dario, who was, a pick you got in a trade, and you're using the pick to move up, the 3 pick.
Yeah, I mean, look, having that kind of certainty and having a 3rd star level player, it does so much for your salary cap because you have that kind of talent locked in at such a below average rate. And truthfully, like we talk about depth. The role players, the Dario Saric in 3 years when he comes up for a contract, they're the type that are more likely to be overpaid. It's really hard if these 3 players actually turn into stars. It's difficult to overpay them, especially on the 25% max. So it helps you also attract other stars because you have these guys under contract. You have them, you know what you have. And as they improve throughout the league, they will get, more recognition. And it also just helps your finances so much. And it makes going out and acquiring kind of those extra pieces, those role players that would take this to the next level. It makes it so much easier because you have 3 guys you can count on. Look, I love Markelle Fultz. I think he's going to be a really terrific NBA player. I do think a lot of people underrate him because he very rarely played on a national stage and because the team was so bad. But I think he would be a great... I mean, really, if you're looking at in terms of, okay, if you're going to craft a player to be the 3rd option on a Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid team, Markelle Fultz is pretty close to the creative player I would come up with in 2K.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Moving off of that, about all we have, there was kind of that, you brought this up, Embiid mentioning at the lottery, he's 2 weeks away from, kind of playing basketball again. Who knows exactly what that means in terms of, what he can do on the court, but it is at least something interesting. And then also there was the Otto Porter, the report from Sean Devaney of the Sporting News that the Sixers, his sources told him that it is a possibility the Sixers make a run at Otto Porter, something of that sort, which I don't think surprises anybody, but is at least something out there, a report out there that we can talk about.
Yeah, I like Otto Porter a lot. I'd be pretty happy with them signing him, and I don't really think I think he's one of those players that in this CBA is going to make a lot of money and people are going to balk at, but I think he's worth it. I think the position the Sixers are in, it's like the next 2 years, the salaries don't really matter. And around the time that Simmons comes off the books is when you really feel like the salaries matter. So I get not wanting to sign a guy on a long-term deal, but with a guy like Otto Porter, I almost feel like there's almost no risk because the absolute worst case situation is he doesn't actualize his talent. He never gets any better. Maybe even he gets hurt and, gets worse. But you're signing him on a 4-year deal. So by the time you get to the point in the deal where you're trying to re-sign your own players and you care about that money, like he'll either be an expiring contract or he'll have 2 years left on his deal and it'll be a 27, 26, 25-year-old player. I kind of feel like with a was kind of like the Harrison Barnes thing last year, and people balked at that. And like, what if he doesn't get any better? And right now he is kind of a bad contract. But it's like, is he really that bad? Because if in a year the Dallas Mavericks decided to trade him, they could find somebody, some rebuilding team that has money that they're not going to use anyway, to just take him for nothing or take him for a late first or a couple seconds. Like, I think the problem is when you sign older, like Kyle Lowry, which we talked about a lot. If Kyle Lowry falls off, now he's 35 years old and making $35 million. That's the kind of unmovable contract that like really hamstrings you. But if you're talking about a young player, like even the Blazers last year with Allen Crabbe, like, if in a year that the Blazers wanted to move Allen Crabbe, they'd probably have to give up, a protected pick or another player or, a couple second-round picks and maybe take on another team's lesser bad deal. Like, I think you can work with it as long as the player is young enough and somebody is out there who might believe in that player turning it around.
Yeah, and I mean, look, Otto Porter has shown enough, kind of gradual, steady improvement through his 4-year career, and it really has been a straight, steady, gradual improvement. Where even if he has a down year next year and you sign him to a big deal, people are going to give him a year or two to prove that wasn't just a down year. Like I don't think anybody's going to jump to the conclusion that he is regressing after he improved every year he was in the league. So I agree with you with how valued shooting is and how good of a shooter he has become. If you do have to move his contract, I don't think it would be difficult to do. And look, we can debate whether or not he would fit with Covington, whether you could play them as a 2-3. But I think he is a player that you would target. And the only reason he's really available, and who knows if he actually is, but because Washington is in such a bad cap situation, I still, though, if I look at it, I think they're going to, and we looked it up, they'd be at like about $90 million committed before signing a guy like Porter. And I think they have one or two more players that are going to need new contracts. So you could see a case where they could be entering in close to the luxury tax zone. I still think if it comes down to it, they're going to find a way to create a little bit of room so that they can sign Porter without jumping into the luxury tax territory, because they have no way through draft picks or cap space to replace what he brings to the table. Well, I think that's probably a good place to cut it off. We will have a bigger group podcast soon. We will get our big boards out there. I know we're kind of hedging on everything, and part of that is because of our own natural indecision. But thank you for hopping on, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. See ya.
You've been listening to the Sixers Beat right here on LibertyBallers.com and LibertyBroadcast.co.